Hey, we know how it is. You wanted sliders, but you needed steps. So you got a set of Rockslide Engineering Slider steps. I mean, with their armored sliders and then that 12-inch drop-down step, it's really the best of both worlds, both a slider and a step, and they work great. But let's say you've had them on your vehicle for a couple years and now you're noticing a problem. Or maybe you just want to know what to do if you do have a problem. Well, we've got you because they're easy to troubleshoot, they're easy to repair, and they're easy to maintain. Now, the first thing we need to figure out is what generation steps you have. There are 3 generations out there. The first gen, those are really rare. We rarely ever see them. So what you normally see is the 2nd gen and more commonly nowadays, the 3rd gen steps. And the big difference is that the 2nd gens, they have an individual motor down on each step. And then you have the brain box that has a circuitry in it. That's going to be in the cab. It's typically under the back seat, sometimes under the carpet. Now on the 3rd gen, they've eliminated that brain box from inside the cab and they've put a sealed circuit board down on each motor. So you only have a little bit of wiring going into the cab, everything else is on the steps themselves. Now the reason that's important is some of the troubleshooting is a little bit different whether you have a Gen 2 or a Gen 3. Now the first thing we want to check is to make sure that the system is turned on. And yes, for those of you who aren't familiar with your slider steps, they do have an on-off switch. And it's on the driver's side, typically right underneath the edge of the dash. Now there are 3 different switches that we've seen used over the years. The first one is a black round switch and it has a little red dot on it. That's an LED, and when it's on, that lights up. The next one, and most common that we've seen, is a round red one, and when you turn it on, that whole switch lights up. And then there's the 3rd switch, and this is the newest one. This is the one we see in the kits these days. It's a round black switch and it just says on and off on it. Doesn't have a light at all. And the reason is that when that switch is on, those lighted switches, and that light's on, it does draw power from your battery. And if you're one who lets your Jeep sit for weeks, if not months on end, you can actually drain that battery down low enough that your Jeep won't start. And that's why RSE tells you to shut your steps off if you're going to let your Jeep sit for a long time. Now with that new unlit on-off switch, RSE has taken that power drain from the LED right out of the equation. But your circuit boards are still under power, so if you're going to let your vehicle sit for a long time, we still recommend that you turn them off. So you want to make sure that switch is on. If you have the lighted ones, the light should be on. If they're not lit, or if you have the non-lit switch and it's on and nothing's working, you're testing the doors, opening, closing, nothing's working, well, hey, turn it off, turn it back on. Test them in both directions. See, are you getting anything? If you're getting nothing, then we need to move under the hood. Now under the hood, we want to find the Rockslide Engineering inline fuse. And if you're like most of us, you probably have a lot of stuff connected to your batteries, and hopefully you've marked yours. If you look really carefully on this one, you'll see that we have RSE in black Sharpie written on there, so we know this is the correct one. So we can open our fuse up, and you'll see there's a 20 amp fuse in there. Now RSE says they've only ever sent out 20 amp fuses. We have seen these that have both 20 amp and 25 amp fuses in them. So if you have a 25 amp in yours, put a 20 amp in it. Now we want to take this fuse and we want to pop it out of there. Now you want to look carefully at your fuse and make sure it's still good. So you see that nice little bridge in there. It should be in one piece connecting one leg to the other. This is a blown fuse for comparison. There you can see that bridge is sideways in there. There's some black in there, and that's from it getting too much power and blowing. So if you have a bad fuse, you want to replace it with a good one, use a 20 amper. Now one of the good things about pulling your fuse to check it is that by leaving your fuse out for 20 seconds, plugging it back in, we're going to reset the system. So we're going to plug it in and you should see and hear your steps deploy and then retract. Right. Now, if your steps do deploy and retract, then hey, that's a good sign. Maybe that has fixed your system just by resetting it. So open your doors, close your doors. Did that fix it? If not, it's time to dig a little deeper. Now to go deeper, it all depends on what generation slider steps you have. If you have the Gen 2s, well, the power comes from the battery through that inline fuse down to the on-off switch and then into the circuit board, that box under the rear seat. And by unplugging and replugging that fuse, we've reset the system. Now on a Gen 3, that power comes through and it's going to split up and it's going to go out to the circuit boards on the steps. And so when you do a hard reset here, sometimes it fixes it. But if it doesn't, now we need to do a full recalibration. And to do that, we're going to unplug all 4 door sensors. So let's show you how that's done. All right, the first thing we want to do is get that front seat out of the way. Now we've got the sensor plug here and then also right on the opposite side for the front door, and we want to follow these down. We need to get in behind this panel. So we can just pop this out, snap that, and having a couple panel tools makes it a lot easier. Now we only need to open it up just enough to get your plug out. And we can unplug that one. Now on the front door, we have that panel already popped out a little bit, and we can grab our sensor switch here. Now we need to do that to the other side too. Now once we have all 4 of them unplugged, we want to plug each one in one at a time. And the steps should open, and then do they close. So this opened, and if we close our door, so we know that one's working. Now we're going to move to the back. Now we're going to plug this one back in. It opens. Now we're going to close the door, and that step should go back up. And it's not. And we know it was working with the front door, so this tells us a few things. We could have a bad door sensor. We could have a misaligned magnet. That magnet and that door sensor aren't aligning properly. We could also have a bad circuit board where the sensor is sending the signal down to the circuit board, but the circuit board's not reading it. So the first thing we want to do is the old magnet test. I've got an extra magnet here. Now we know the sensor's good because when we plug it in, it's opening that step saying the door is open. But it's not coming back up when we shut the door. So we could be missing the magnet, which is right here. So we know that's not the case. It could be misaligned. And the easiest way to test that is to grab another magnet and just hold it against the sensor. And you want to wait a couple seconds. We'll even move it and wait. We have no action. So for whatever reason, the signal from the sensor that the door is closed, i.e. a magnet against it, is not telling the circuit board, or the circuit board's not telling the step to come back up. So now we need to go even deeper. Now if we go underneath our slider and we look towards the back, you're going to see an opening, and this is where we can get into our plugs that are on our circuit board and our motor. Now this is 3rd gen, so we have both the circuit board and the motor plug to remove and then plug them back in. We want to double check these, make sure they're good, they're not all corroded. If you have a Gen 2 step, you're only going to have 1 plug to remove. So we can just press in on that tab and give it a good wiggle. And sometimes they're really tight. So you can grab a screwdriver, little guy, and we want to press in on that tab. And we can grab a second screwdriver and very carefully just help that plug off. Now we want to turn, take a look, make sure there's not a lot of corrosion in there. Our motor wires, we can follow out, and we have this plug right here. And again, we're going to look to see, do we have corrosion in there? If so, we want to clean it up. If not, we can plug it back in and then plug our circuit board back in. And there it opened and closed all by itself, just by getting some power to it. So now we can check, does the system work correctly? And we want to do that on both sides. Now, if you have a Gen 2 set, remember the brain box is going to be in the vehicle, probably under the rear seat, maybe even under the carpet. So make sure it's not wet, make sure that it's not corroded, and you're going to want to unplug that and plug it back in and then test the system all over again. Now we want to do a check on our motors themselves. All right, so now our next step is going to test the motor to make sure the motors are good. So this is our lead that goes up to the motor, and we have 2 wires. We have a yellow wire and a red wire. To bring the step down, we want to put a ground to the red wire, and then we're going to put 12 volt to the yellow wire. Now you can do this just with a couple leads from your battery. We've got a fancy power probe here. All right. And it comes down good. Now we're going to reverse it to put that step back up. So we're going to put our ground on the yellow wire, and we're going to Put 12 volt to the red. So that's telling us that that motor is good. So if the system's still not working, that tells us that the motor's not the problem, it's going to be in that circuit board. So you're going to want to get a replacement circuit board. Now, if we apply power to both legs and we're getting nothing, that step doesn't move at all, well, that tells us that motor is bad. But it's very rare. We've seen very few motors go out. Most of the time, it's that circuit board. So the next thing we want to check is we have 3 red wires here going into this circuit board plug, and we want to check. We should have 12 volt at one of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got power there. So we know that we're getting power down to the circuit board. So our motor's functioning. We've got power to the circuit board, but the circuit board's not functioning. So that tells us that that circuit board is what's out. Now, what happens if your step doesn't close? You open your door, you close the door, the step doesn't go up, or maybe it only goes up part way. On a Gen 2, if you can help it up, if you can put your hand on that and push this and the step goes right up and closes, that tells us that it's the gas strut. There's a gas strut in this step and the gas strut needs to be replaced. Now, you can replace it with another gas strut, but even better, RSE does offer a heavy-duty spring kit, and that'll help return that step right up in there and it'll keep it closed. Now on a Gen 3, if the step doesn't go up, then all that testing that we've already done will help troubleshoot it. It came right down to where we know the motor works. If we apply power both ways, the motor opens the step and it closes the step. And then when we test our plug coming down to the circuit board, we have 12 volt coming into the circuit board, but it's just not operating properly. And we know that we've already done our recalibration on all our door sensors. We've reset the unit by pulling the fuse, putting the fuse back in. We've cycled the unit on and off. We have a bad circuit board in this, which means it's time to replace the circuit board in this. So we've got a new one. Our next step is to get this step off, and then we're going to show you how to replace that circuit board. Okay, our first step to removing our steps is going to be unplugging them. So you got to look really closely here. We have this E-clip, and we want to grab something wide that we can push on both tangs at the same time. And that's what that E-clip looks like, and you can see why they call it an E-clip. This is a circuit board that's bad. We're getting signal to it from the sensors, and it's just not working. Okay. And there's the motor assembly with the circuit board. So here's the old circuit board and motor assembly, and here's our new circuit board and motor assembly. Now you can just replace the circuit board, but we figured while we're in here, we have that step down. Let's just go ahead and do it all as one unit. All right, we got some blue Loctite. This is 248. It's a nice medium strength Loctite. We're gonna throw a little bit on our 2 mounting bolts. Take our new motor, and that's gonna drop down in. We wanna hook our arm up to the step. And then we have our forward bolt. And then our forward mounting bolt. And we have this little E-clip. Then we want to use that blue Loctite on all our mounting bolts. So you've done that hard reset. You pulled that fuse, you waited 20 seconds, plugged the fuse back in, the steps drop down and then retract it again. And then you open the door and the step drops down. Then when we close it, it doesn't go back. So one of the things we want to do is we want to check our magnet to sensor placement. So we're going to open a door and I just have a generic magnet and I'm going to set it right over the sensor. And I'm going to move it from one end of the sensor to the other. And I'm getting nothing. Now we come up here to this one. Oh, there she goes. So this side appears to be working if I put a magnet on it. So this magnet is way off. So let's go ahead and grab that. I'm going to move it back up into here. So sometimes the problem can be just the magnet to the sensor placement. And just by moving the magnet a little bit, all of a sudden your steps work again. And you can test that just with a small spare magnet. Just go over and set it on the sensor. Now, sometimes the sensors are a little sensitive, so you might have to put it on one side or the other or right in the very middle, and then count to about 5. Give it a few seconds to actually read and tell that step to retract. If we do have a magnet that seems to be moving around, it means it's lost its adhesive on the back. So pull it off, clean it up with some rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. And then we want to clean the paint, make sure it's really clean. I have some 3M double-sided tape here. And I'm just going to apply that to that magnet. Now, if it's cold out, you'll want to make sure you heat up the magnet and the door. And I'm just going to use a utility knife. We'll just trim this right around that magnet. So now we can peel that backing off. And we can stick it in there. Let's hold it for a couple seconds. And boom, we're fixed. Now, if you're missing a magnet, you can order replacement magnets from Rockslide Engineering. They can get them right out to you. And you really don't need any special magnets. So if you have something around the house that you can use, that'll work too. Now we've shown you some troubleshooting. We've shown you some repairs. Now it's time to show you some maintenance. And this is especially important for those of you who live in the salt belt where you have a lot of that road salt that can get kicked up in there. If you watch really closely during our repair, you could see some rust in and around ours. And that's just here in Western Washington. We have a lot of rain, but we don't have the road salt like people do back east. Now, one of the biggest things is to keep them clean. So if you've been out in the muck and the mud, you want to make sure you open these up and you get in there and you spray everything clean, get all that mud and muck off. Then we want to lube all our pivot points. This is just some Permatex silicone lubricant, and we want to make sure we hit all our pivot points. We want to cycle those steps a few times. And then we can go back in and wipe off any excess. Now, if you do live in the Rust Belt, you might even want to look into some sort of serious, real adhesive, tacky grease that you could get in there. Anything you can do to help protect those pivot points. And if you keep them clean, you keep them greased, these steps are going to last for a long time, especially if you can protect those electricals. So as you can see, troubleshooting, repair, and maintenance on these Rockslide Engineering Step Sliders, slider steps, it's all pretty easy to do. So hopefully that'll help some of you out there that are having problems, and it'll help make some of you comfortable who are worried about having problems. Thanks for watching today. We'll see you again soon.